Okay, so Jacques Coetzee, we all here, we all know him and love him, I think. If you've been here, you'll have been around when he's hosted someone or been around to hear Jacques ask an insightful, perfect question of someone, or to hear him read one of his wonderful poems in the open mic. I think Jacques is an incredibly kind person. He's an intuitive person, and he is someone that if you are lucky enough to know, you will want to always count as a person in your life or a friend. His poetry moves you. It finds words for emotion that you might not have otherwise been able to describe. It's got a musical quality to it, and his voice brings all of that to life, I find, when he reads his words. As I'm sure you know, he's published his debut solo collection in 2020 with Schlange and Illuminated Darkness. And this magical collection went on to win the Ingrid Jonker Prize as well as the Olive Schreiner Award this year, which is just incredible and very, very well deserved. So he's also won the Afrikaans Avbo Poetry Prize last year, and on top of being a wonderful poet, is also a musician who's had multiple albums come out through the years. I am very, very excited to hear hopefully some new work and maybe some old and familiar. Jacques, over to you.
It's very wonderful to be here. Thank you for coming. I'm going to read a few poems from An Illuminated Darkness, and then an assortment of new stuff. I'd like to think it's in a particular sequence, but it's probably fairly random. Let me just wake my machine up. So I'm going to start with a poem called Dusk Poem. And it's a poem that I nearly didn't include in my collection because I thought it showed me in rather a bad light, but my publisher thought that was essential to any collection, that you had to have at least, I'm teasing him and I'm teasing myself, but he liked this one. Dusk Poem. Then there were the two American tourists, a man and his girl, I think they must have been, who wanted to pray for me at dusk. I pretended not to understand. Why me? Why not for someone else? But I was too obvious a candidate to pass over in prayer, and they, emboldened by strange surroundings, by their faith in miracles. I sighed. I wanted none of it, but they were sweet, insistent. And my guide dog and I had only just learned to walk to that restaurant. It would be a diversion, after all. I was hungry to slip beneath the surface of this moment. Anything to be a citizen here in this private place. And so I let the man pray while the girl, soft-voiced and shy, deferred. Let them pray for the return of my sight, and immediately regretted it. The young man's voice, loud, authoritative, desperate somehow, vulnerable. I had done an improper thing, willing them to believe themselves into a corner, whether they knew it or not. Walking away afterwards, I imagined them settling down for the night, with desire perhaps unspoken, forbidden between them. I thought of the cost of such refusals, felt the old familiar restlessness that still sets me on my way through nights like these, looking past dawn for one more taste of this incorrigible life, so that one day I can say, I gave myself to this messy world and tried to love it long after I'd given up trying to change it. No better than I should be, I didn't stand apart. In the end, I redeemed myself. I wasn't a tourist. And this one's, this one's called The Gatekeeper, and it's about holidays I would spend by the sea when I was about 11, 12. For years, I used to daydream about it, that short journey, head first down the water slide at Margate. In my dreams, that journey, not more than half a minute, was stretched over hours and hours, the slide becoming always longer, the steps I had to climb to reach its top, growing in number every day. And each time, at the end of that fluid motion, someone would offer me something, sacred knowledge from a book perhaps, or the love of a mysterious woman. Always something extraordinary, something meant for me alone. Just the other day it came to me. The gift I wanted didn't come at the end of that journey, but at its beginning. From the man who collected our money at the swimming pool on Margate Beach, a tollkeeper of sorts. He must have seen how much I loved that ride, how much, head first down the slide and into the pool. He walked up to my sisters and me, said I could ride for free. And I, self-conscious, desperately afraid of the world's pity, felt nothing then but annoyance at this man who knew nothing about me. I was sure he only saw my blindness and not me trapped inside it. I remember scandalizing my oldest sister afterwards. You should have told him that I was retarded as well. Generous toll man, I can see you now, collecting coins from entitled whites. I'm sure I was not even unusual in my thoughtlessness. I'm sure none of us knew the luck we had then. You must have seen a blind boy of 11, simply enjoying the ride, simply comfortable for once in his own body. I never knew the first thing about you, but I wanted to let you know that boy's as much alive as you or I. His unseeing eyes are already fixed on some far-off goal. But for now, he is about to receive the blessing, about to set out head over heels and in utter ignorance on a ride he never earned or paid for, given license to play by your unacknowledged grace. This one's called Sorcery, and it's built on a real person, a monk and a poet called Milarepa, who I think lived in Korea, but it could possibly be Japan. I'll have to check. Sorcery 1. The monk Milarepa, grown wise in the ways of clinging and aversion, forsook the crooked ways of men in favor of solitude and equanimity. Asked in old age what he still desired from life, he said, "In my youth, I performed black deeds. In middle age, I practiced innocence. Now I am old, I want nothing. To say more than this could only lead to laughing and grief." 2. This morning, as always, I crouched at my desk, sharpening my appetites, listening for the beast that lives inside me. Each day I scavenge for food and drink, for the fleeting pleasures of blood and skin. It is true that at dusk there is a moment of pure emptiness, as if I stood outside myself, listening, as if I heard myself speak in a dream, or from the other side of a busy street. And still, I know I'll set out tomorrow, trying once again to catch the world in a net of words, to hold it between my two open hands. I will embark once again on the things that inevitably lead to laughing and grief. And this one is called Still at War with the Stoics. I think it explains itself. I wrote it for a friend of mine called Peter, and he bought my book, and for a year, apparently, he was too afraid to read this poem that was dedicated to him in case he didn't like it. But eventually he did read it, and he said it was fine. Still at war with the Stoics. It's not that I don't understand your admiration for them. I have noted their dignified silence in the face of suffering. I've noted also the accuracy of their assessments, how love remains an experiment, always on the alert, always at risk of collapsing into mere biology. How the beloved body is always breaking down at a rate that is unpredictable, but steady and sure nevertheless. I have read the dire predictions in all the mirrors that I cannot see, and yet I remain mostly unimpressed by their dogged endurance, by that blank-faced, solemn turn away from the body, from pleasure and sorrow into virtue, into the heroism of, I can't complain, of just getting on with it. Instead, I sit with the drama queens, with the hysterics, the drunks, the ones who rage and rage, hoping that even rage will become something precise one day and almost noble. Do you remember that time sitting next to me by sheer chance on a plane, drinking unpaid for whiskey, and me bursting into tears in the middle of reading my own poem aloud to you, for God's sake? Such silliness. And yet we knew it was real. A poem, even if not first rate, had found the place where love had been imprisoned and set it free, dispersing all that had been repressed back into the world again, transformed. This one's called Reenchantment. The first time it happened, it felt like the end of the world. Hot water failed to flow from the taps in the old Stellenbosch flat when I was still immortal. A plumber was summoned, the mystery solved, an air bubble in the geyser. All that water, an infinite supply, it seemed in those days, available but somehow held at bay. After he left, we turned the tap on and waited. The splutter of water through piping then, through interior worlds we only guessed at for a moment, if we guessed at all, until it flowed again, uninterrupted, simply flowed into our hands, and we forgot. Last night, reaching for me in the dark, you asked me for a story, as you used to do in the beginning. I felt the dry, dead air in every cell, in every fiber that I could call my own. Language stopping dead at the gate of the mouth. I held my breath as if in faith. tried to imagine those invisible pipes, those labyrinths under the polished tiles of an abandoned world. And then it came, the first stammerings of speech, the flow of shared narrative between us, weaving us together seamlessly. I felt the slow enchantment taking hold again before my mind relaxed, relieved, then drifted into sleep. List of numbers. I still keep their numbers in the file labeled telephone list on my slow computer. One for the man who read back my half-formed poems to me in a monotonous voice, daring me to throw them away until I slowly learned to sing more softly, urgently. One for the man who fed me olives and whiskey, though it must have been clear by then, my being straight was not just a passing phase after all. One for the woman who gave me a sheaf of corn because she didn't know how to say goodbye. One for the woman who fed me rare plants and asked me politely, after I'd toasted her with the umpteenth song, if I didn't come with a pause button, for God's sake. One for the woman I hardly ever phoned because I could not think of a question that could be worthy of a mind like hers. One for the Greek restaurant that no longer exists, where I dueled with someone over halva and ice cream because we had no money for a second portion. One for the man who dared me to do the wrong thing, to live dangerously, and then died of it. One for the man who fathered me well, and then asked me just before the end to forgive him for his ignorance. You can consign the body to the fire, the bills, paid or unpaid, the outmoded ways of being, and the very bad poems. The names are not consumed. They refuse to be anything else than the sum of my parts, hovering now on an invisible screen without ever quite adding up. Now I'm reading newer work, although you may have heard some or all of them before. This is called Pulling Stronger. 5 minutes into the Zoom reading, you walked off, said you couldn't hear a damn thing anyway. I could not see you, but I sensed you deliberately making that exit, wrapped in your aloneness. You always said you were practiced in the art of solitude, and I flatter myself into thinking that somehow I'm slowly learning it too. And still, as I hear my own words echoed in the assent of friends and strangers, it is your solitude that pulls me deeper into poetry, which properly belongs to lonely places, which wells up unstoppable from ground that's unconsoled. That night when you walked out, your ears tuned to an inner voice I still only dimly hear. I know the best part of me turned off the magic screen and put my solitude there in the darkness next to yours. This one is for a friend of mine who died in August. And he was very ill at the end. He had esophageal cancer and also emphysema. He was very intense and, smoked a great deal all his life. And this may or may not have, contributed. you know, to his being ill. I don't know. Last hug. How is it possible that this world, so full of joy and sorrow, of rogues and insufferable hypocrites, doesn't contain enough air today to fill those wrecked lungs of yours, doesn't contain the right food to travel down your throat and stay down? Rooms would fill with laughter when you entered them, generous as summer, stern as hell too when the rage was in you. One time, we must have been coming home from a hard day's work, busking at the Cape Town waterfront. You scolded me that I shouldn't write poems about poets, but only about my own experience, and that I should acquire more of that immediately. Friend, I'm sorry it's taken that last hug to prepare me for writing this, even though there's no way I can get enough air into these lines for you. At least I can finally say I got the message, and that even for a joke as cruel as this, there is rhythm and music. Even for this goodbye, surely there has to be a poem that's strong enough. This is another death poem. It is a funeral poem. First Zoom funeral I attended. It's called Spirit. I don't know much about the things of spirit, though each year the numbers of my personal dead keep swelling. These days, when I try to talk to my upright, sober, dead father, I never fail to remember that first COVID funeral, beautiful, harrowing, 6 months ago now, in the first summer of lockdown. Only the ghost of connection there between us, but we sat in the presence of pure sorrow at a life that was suddenly gone, pure joy at the full life that had been. There was much talk of God and of carousing into the small hours, until I could not tell such things apart in the general intoxication. We must stop crying now, someone said, in tears at the very end. Sam would have said, the brandy's waiting. That's when I knew, all the way along my blood and into my bones, I'm still a beginner in the things of spirit. The only speech I truly know is with the living still, though my Father's voice speaks through mine uninvited, though the ashes of dogs remain in their urns on the desk. Always again, I choose that long draught that burns my throat, while there is anything left on this side to celebrate or savor. It's wonderful to be at a Zoom event now and feel much more connected. I didn't think I would get there. During lockdown, one of the things that started happening is that people who tried to sell you things, who would try to sell you things door to door, started phoning you for fear of the virus. So this is called Jehovah's Witness on the phone. That's 15 minutes down the drain, I said, as I put down the receiver. What kind of tender-hearted folly is this, pretending to take those half-baked objections to evolutionary science half seriously? It's just that he sounded so very lonely, like someone's disgruntled grandfather. Who was he going to talk shit to, if not to me? Ah, Coetzee, You sentimentalist, don't flatter yourself. Instead, take that misplaced tenderness of yours and put it somewhere useful, somewhere that is riskier, trickier, closer to home. This is called Summa, and it's from the life of Thomas Aquinas, who's he's called the angelic doctor. He's taken immensely seriously by Catholics the world over, and he was a very systematic thinker. And the Summa was the work that he'd almost completed when he died. Summa. In the last year of his life, Thomas Aquinas, expositor of systematic theology, straining his massive intellect to marry faith and reason, experienced a vision during Mass one day that left him unable to finish his great work. Asked by his scribe why he refused to dictate its final chapters, Aquinas said he could not, because by the light of what he had seen, everything he'd written seemed like mere straw, blown by the wind. Let clerics, scholars, and official hagiographers labor to show that the Summa was already complete, that we can deduce where the argument was going. You and I, beloved, we would trade all those polished arguments, all those well-written contracts between this world and the next, for a glimpse of that ecstatic revelation, which arrived when he probably didn't want it, if revelation is the right word for what comes to us who have no gods left to humble us into silence. How are we doing for time?
It's about 8 o'clock now, so you're still good if you want to go a bit longer.
Okay, it's not long now. Singularity. She wanted to slip out of her complex mind. She wanted to slip out of the museum of many names, where each thing is inventoried, ordered, shelved. She wanted to find a place where the shell of language was soft enough for her to edge her way into the silent heat before thought. And each morning, she would wake with a half-formed memory of escape still on her lips, the dishevelment of her night's journey. And the same old familiar world was all around her, and oh, it was lovely, it was terribly beautiful. And she would stretch her arms towards the sky outside, try to keep her mind empty and innocent, but always, before she could stop them, the layers were there, the thick, multiple scatter of many words, the sheltering clothes against her naked skin. This one is a complaint about what it feels like these days for me to listen to the radio. Might just be a sign of the age that I am, might disdate me. Still, in praise of gritty music. Nothing more disheartening than this safe music on the radio. Melodies with the lifeblood squeezed out of them with auto-tuning. These songs drift clear of danger and desire, suspended by the high jinks of producers and accountants, their ears always trained on the bottom line. I remember exactly where I was the first time I heard Tom Waits's voice, the grit so deep in the grain of it. I had to reassess the sort of life I wanted, what quantities of excess and discipline could birth such tremblings of the air. And one day, I was 12, just back from school. My sister turned on Bowie's Is There Life on Mars, as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world to do. That first chorus sounded and the doors of my mind blew open. Could that be a man's voice? A woman's? What sort of person was it that had such a range? I tried to follow the dark, coisting lyric as it caressed and stung. And in the wake of that music, slow, satiable curiosity. If a voice could carry this, what knowledge could the body carry? What hilarious research could it embrace? Even though there's no way back to the first wonder, such revelations still find me sometimes hidden in between stations, left of the dial on an indestructible jukebox that has never been bought or sold. I think only two more, or maybe three short ones. The Bridge. On a lovely spring day in Paris, 2 years before I was born, the poet Paul Celan, precisely the same age then that I am now, fatally threw himself off a bridge into the Seine, reportedly for the love of an unattainable woman. He had already survived the Holocaust, and after that the choice to write in German, in tortured fragments, almost impenetrable, that he fetched from an immense dark space where words had never been. Whereas I, a lesser, luckier man, though I also write myself further away from where I started, I am walking this impossible bridge of words, rickety, creaking even under the weight of a whisper, walking in the faith that it can hold me, walking with a clear mind towards what I cannot see, can hardly imagine, trusting that you can hear this, that you are on the other side, still waiting. And this is the poem that I always like to end off with at the moment. And it's dedicated to Maurice Sendak, and I'm sure you've all heard it. Maurice Sendak wrote Where the Wild Things Are, and he was a wonderfully exuberant man, and also very private until very near the end of his life. In Search of the Wild Things for Maurice Sendak. Even as a boy, you found a way through to the next world, across the corridor from your quiet, stoic family to the tables of those Sicilian boys, their parents drinking wine and raucous, their lives still untouched by reports of Holocaust. Much later, you showed us the way there, building escape routes for the unlit, starving children in all of us, cooking up a storm in the midnight kitchens of our imagination. But I love you best as an old man, tearful and joyous, only months before death, coming from the ends of the earth to say, I am in love with the world, knowing that's the most dangerous emotion, still able to cut through any system, through any constricting form, to get to the raucous table, the flushed faces on the other side of the world. Once on YouTube, I found an immense recording for gay choirs only of that interview, the crescendo building to a single note, your final message to us. Live your life, live your life, live your life. That's it.
Oh, wow. Can we unmute to clap for Jacques?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly moving and wonderful. So we have time for questions for those of you still with us. Anybody who wants to pick Jacques' brain, you are welcome to raise your hand or type a message in the chat or just let me know. Daniela Demakatso, you up first.
Hi, Demakatso.
Just unmute yourself. Hi, Jacques. Thank you so much for this absolutely wonderful reading. I have a comment and a question. So the comment first, I'm so glad that you didn't, that you were persuaded actually to leave Dusk Poem, and because it's just amazing. And it speaks to me. I just absolutely love it. I mean, I've been in that situation before and nobody's ever written about it. So I think it's really important. So that's the comment. The question is, I feel that a lot of the poems that you've read and a lot of the poems that I read from your collection sort of deal with joy, humor, and melancholia sometimes at the same time. How difficult is it to keep the balance between these three sometimes opposing sentiments, and maybe sometimes there's sort of like, I don't know, two sides of the same coin? Yeah.
Jacques, I accidentally muted you, so just unmute yourself again. So sorry.
That good?
Perfect.
That's a wonderful question. It's great to hear your voice, Demakatso. I think there are two sides of the same coin. Joy and grief, are the opposite of not feeling, of numbness, of boredom, of complacency. But it is difficult to keep a balance. And I think my poems are often about that difficulty, Yeats said that we make poetry out of our quarrel with ourselves. So when I fight with myself, that often becomes, or disagree with myself, that often becomes a poem. There's an essay that my therapist often talks about, an essay by Freud, where he talks about mourning versus melancholia. And melancholia is the thing where is a state in which you collapse into the past and you can't move forward. But mourning is this difficult state in which you actually work incredibly hard, internalize the things that you've lost, and somehow keep moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I definitely think joy and grief are that range is what we need, is what we want.
Yeah, I was actually thinking today of Freud's Mourning and Melancholia when I was listening to your poems.
Oh wow! Well, maybe you have the same therapist as me.
No, I wrote my PhD on melancholia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Jacques, just to let you know the chat, Christine said, thank you so much, Jacques. Your poetry blows me away every time. Karen or Karen had to leave, but said thank you so much. And Annette has said thank you so much, Jacques. Always such a joy to listen to you. And then we've got a hand up from Georgia.
Hi. Oh,
Hi.
hold on, my camera. There we go. Hi, Jacques. I had the terrible misfortune of my internet failing me this evening, but I did manage to come back just in time to hear you read your tribute to Maurice Sendak. And as much as it breaks my heart that I didn't hear the rest, I'm really glad that the Red Wheelbarrow do record everything so that I can go back and hear it, which is great. And when you have terrible internet like I do, it's really great to know that that's there, because it's a couple of times I've not been able to join. And I just wanted to say how it was really interesting to come in on just at that moment as you were reading this poem, because having known you for all these many years that I have, and just such a big fan of everything that you sing and write, the thing that really stuck with me tonight was when you spoke about Maurice Sendak being in love with the world. And I think actually, if I had to say something about you and what your writing and your poetry gives me, it is this feeling of that you really are in love with the world, and it always generates that in me. You know, it rekindles that feeling in me, and I just appreciate it so much. And you are so extraordinarily generous with that, and with the encouragement that comes through in your words. The question I have is, I wonder, and this has been such a strange few years, and especially this year, and with everything that's happened, and your amazing time recently with your awards and everything, do you have a sense right now of what's next? Is there something that's calling you? Is there a theme that's calling you? Is there something? So it's a terrible question, Jacques, sorry.
I don't have a sense of a theme. There's more that I want to say about some of the things that I've written about, but if I'm called by something or by someone, it's by this guy. It's by this guy, Maurice Sendak, because I found this video at the beginning of the year when I was not in an easy place. And I listened to that interview with him a lot, and sometimes it would feel like a blessing, like he was saying, I'm saying that you can live your life the way you want to. But sometimes it was like an admonition. It felt like as if he was saying, why aren't you living your life? And that tension speaks to me, that calls me. So I would, you know, if I believed in saints, I would talk to Maurice. But I don't. I feel myself being called very urgently by that question, what that would mean.
Wow.
To live your own life, of course, as opposed to someone else's idea of what your life could be, should be.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
The short answer is I don't know. I don't really know what's next.
That's great. Thanks, Jacques.
And thanks for what you said.
Thank you. I totally agree with that comment on how Jacques' work makes one feel. Margaret's got a hand up next.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Sure. You know, now I was talking to my granddaughter the other day, and she was, and you were talking about Stoics, you know, and she was saying, well, Granny, you are a Stoic. Yeah, that's what she's been reading about Stoics. Granny's a Stoic. Right. And I thought, now, you know, there I am going around spreading joy and light, like a sort of a Pollyanna, and
right.
but that's not what I really want to be. I mean, things, I hate people who sit and moan and carry on about their lives, and think that it's the right thing to do is to pour out all your, dig deep into all the trauma that's happened to you, and then put that into poems. And I can do gloom, but doesn't come really naturally. But I was thinking, how are you able to do this, to write about pain and suffering without it being what should I say, without it being morbid and self-indulgent? That's what I would like to be able to do, is the way you do it.
Oh, that's an interesting question, and I didn't see it coming at all. Well, okay, for one thing, the Stoics are actually more complex than I made them out to be in that
yes,
part.
yes.
They're more interesting. They're more interesting than I give them credit for. And of course, the thing about Stoics is actually that they don't complain. They don't.
Yeah, exactly.
They suffer in silence. They have that nobility of suffering. So, and I think Bertrand Russell said, if you're in a concentration camp, that's the best philosophy. But the rest of the time, maybe not so much. When you're in prison, that's fine. But I don't know how you write about suffering and pain without being self-indulgent, I suppose. And I don't know if I do it. I suppose you go into the feelings, and then you take a step back and you look at yourself and you read the poem aloud. And then you go into the feelings again, and then you take a step back and you look at it again. So it's the same that you write about love without being sentimental, or that you write about politics without being preachy, or about sex without being cheesy. You have to go into something, and then you take a step back
and look at it again.
So you move in and out of the experience. But I just want to say, I think you write very movingly about difficult things and about pain. So if I were you, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Well, Jacques, I'll try and learn from you and what you've. Thank you for what you've said. Thank you very much.
I love the way because you write up. You often bring laughter and tears into the same poem, and that's a sort of like a wry kind of smile, and that's a very beautiful thing that you do, and you do it so well.
Well, thank you very much. I didn't know that I did that, but now I'm happy to know.
Oh, thank you. That was a brilliant question. And then we've got a hand from Cindy.
Hi, Jacques. Congratulations.
Hello.
Hello. It's so beautiful to hear you read always. So this was a real treat. I suppose my question is sort of going to run on like what was previously asked by Margaret, but I wanted to ask you about this thing of restraint. You just spoke now, talk about sex without being cheesy, talk about politics without being preachy. So there's an incredible, at least in my experience of your writing and in listening to you even, there's this restraint in your writing, but there's also a deep musicality to the way that you write. And I know that you're a musician, a brilliant musician. And I just wanted to know, what is the relationship between, is there a relationship, a strong relationship between your writing and your relationship to being a musician? And when you write, do you write with with a rhythm, an internal rhythm or a musicality in mind at the level of the sentence. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more. You spoke about Tom Waits, and I just wanted to hear more about your relationship between writing and music.
When I'm writing a poem, I usually want to be singing, and when I'm singing, I usually want to be writing a poem. But yes, musicality is very important to me in the writing, not at the level of the sentence so much, but at the level of the line. The way the lines run into each other. I read them aloud, and I do want them to sing for me, which, you know, doesn't necessarily mean they will for other people, but the rhythm is very important to me. So there's a kind of, there's a kind of, ideally that works subconsciously. There was a time when I would just fall into iambic pentameters, you know, ba-dum, 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 and there would be these Wordsworthian rhythms, and I had to break it up a bit and experiment with longer lines and shorter lines. And Nick Mulgrew, my publisher, actually helped with that. You know, why don't you stretch the lines, shorten lines? And that was good, and I try to do more of that now. The restraint may have to do with a thing that I say, that I take a step back and I look at the experience and then I go into it again. But I would like there to be less restraint in some ways. I would like to be less restrained sometimes in my writing. I think it's very important for there to be something a little bit crazy, a little bit something of madness, something of, I don't know what to call it, something fiery. Can't find. That's what my next poem will be about. You know, what that thing is that makes it not sing to a regular beat.
Oh, I just wanted to say also, when I say restraint, I say it in the best possible way. You know exactly when to hold back and exactly when to really stir up. And so your poems are incredibly stirring, but there is real thought and care at the level of the line and in the sentences that I think is really beautiful and powerful, because sometimes you can get carried away. And I see this a lot in, in younger poets, in myself even. So yeah, so it was just beautiful. So thank you for that response.
Well, thank you. If there's feeling and thought in it, if they can both be in there, then I'm happy. You know, that's what it's about. Thank you.
Thank you for that one. Anybody else who still has a question, you can still let me know. I shall ask one while we wait to see if anyone else sticks a hand up. I'm curious, is there a specific way that works the best for you in approaching a poem? Like, is there a certain, I don't know, sitting at a certain desk or certain time of day that you find you the most productive, or is it very variable? And like, how do you enter a poem? Do you first think about what you want to write about, or does it just come out as you're writing? Yeah, anything about that?
The short answer to that is I always sit at whatever desk is available 2 hours before Zoom reading. That's the time when the poem arrives, because otherwise my critic is too strong. And there's too much time. And then I can't do it really. It's, other people write sonnets and villanelles to give them a structure. I wait till 2 hours before time is up. But in the days before I sit down, something is brewing, something is happening. There might be an image, there might be a situation. Okay, I'm going to write about this. this is what I urgently want to say to myself. This is what I urgently want to say to so-and-so, and I just can't find a way to say it. And then 2 hours before the reading, I somehow find the energy to say it. And then, you know, it doesn't always work, but often I have to write a poem quite fast. Anything from 20 minutes to an hour. That's usually the time it takes me.
Mm.
And afterwards I'll edit things, but I have to do it fast.
Mm. That makes sense. Do you write in Afrikaans as much as in English, or is that...
I don't. And I want to write in Afrikaans more. And I do think I would say other things. And they are Afrikaans poets that I love and with whom I want to be in conversation, which is always a good thing. One or two of them I've even had the good fortune to know. So I will do that at some point.
Thank you for those answers. Is there anyone else with a question tonight? Silke.
Thank you. Hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Jacques. Yeah, you know, as the questions have been coming, which have been such interesting questions, it occurs to me that as far as I can tell, I might be making a mistake, but your poetry overall is very, very populated. It's very socially engaged in that I believe in almost all your poems, you're engaging with the thoughts of another person, the actions of another person, the words of another person. Often you address that person directly by means of the, you. And I just wondered if you want to comment on that, if you believe that's an accurate sense that I've got there.
Yes.
And yeah, I'd like you to say more about it.
I think so. I think when I started writing poems, they were like overgrown, pretentious love letters. When I started writing, that's what would happen when I tried to write a poem. And they were pretty awful, but they were addressed to someone. They were talking to someone. It's like, like Wordsworth in the Prelude, he's talking to Coleridge all the time. Oh, friend,
yes.
let me tell you. No, I think it's true. I probably, I prefer playing with other people, than playing with myself. I do.
Okay.
Playing alone.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was just interesting because you said you fight with yourself.
Yes, I do.
But then it occurs to me that in the poems, that fight becomes engagement with another.
It often does. It often does. And when it's not another outside of me, it's another inside of me. Because that also happens. But often, often they address a beloved.
Well, like for example, the Jehovah's Witness poem, the spark and spur of that poem is an engagement with another person, and then you end up actually engaging with yourself about your engagement with that person. So I guess that's a good example of those different.
And that's actually the fight with myself. So I was sort of feeling, I've done something nice to this grandfatherly old person. He doesn't have to talk shit to his children now, or his grandchildren, or his wife. I helped him, and what do you think you are virtuous now because you did this? Where are you actually at the forefront of your life? What's the conversation that you're not having that you should be having? And then that becomes you can berate yourself. So in a conversation you might defend yourself, But in a poem, you can berate yourself, and that can be, well, sometimes you can even learn something, maybe.
Yes.
Maybe.
And that leads almost to another question is, do you have a clear sense of your reader or listener when you write your poems?
I have had a first audience in mind, an audience or a muse. And at the same time, it's strangers, it's people that I haven't met. And that gives me joy, the feeling that someone that I haven't met might find a poem and think, well, where did this come from?
Yes.
Thank you for that interesting conversation. Anybody else with a question for Jacques or a comment? Doesn't look like it. So then we say a big thank you to Jacques. I think we can all agree it was a wonderful reading, hearing both new and old work and award-winning work and work in the process. So thank you for sharing with us and answering all the questions so generously. Let's all unmute and clap for Jacques one more time.